We stand on the precipice of an ancient human longing to reach the sky, to touch the stars. But what if the true frontier isn't light years away, but just beyond the atmosphere, a mere breath, above where the air thins to nothing? Imagine floating in an abyss so profound, so utterly devoid of sound and substance, that the only thing holding you to reality is the faint, distant blue marble you call home. This isn't a journey to another planet, but to the very edge of our own, a silent, unforgiving threshold where the human body is pushed past its limits, and the mind confronts an isolation so complete it threatens to unravel the very fabric of identity. What does it mean to be human when the world, as you know it, ceases to exist just meters below your feet? This is the story of that final ascent, of the individuals brave or perhaps foolish enough to gaze into the void, and what they found waiting for them, not in the cosmos, but within themselves. The conventional understanding of space begins at an arbitrary line, a legal fiction known as the Kármán line, situated at an altitude of 100 kilometers above mean sea level. This invisible demarcation, recognized by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, suggests a definitive boundary where Earth's atmosphere ceases and the vacuum of the cosmos commences. It is a convenience, a simplification for terrestrial administration, but it bears little resemblance to the complex, diffuse reality of our planet's outer membrane. The true edge is not a line, but a gradient, an agonizingly slow dissolution. Above 80 kilometers, the air is already too thin to support aerodynamic flight. Molecules, already sparsely distributed, continue their ascent, scattering further and further apart. The thermosphere, extending upwards for hundreds of kilometers, is technically still part of Earth's atmosphere, yet its density is a mere fraction of a laboratory vacuum. Beyond that, the exosphere stretches for thousands of kilometers, a diffuse halo of hydrogen and helium atoms, occasionally colliding, mostly escaping into the void. It is within these obscure, high-altitude regions, far above the typical orbits of the International Space Station or the familiar low Earth satellites, that the true frontier lies, a vast, unforgiving expanse that remains tethered to Earth by gravity, yet is functional. It is a domain of extremes, temperatures that fluctuate wildly from hundreds of degrees Celsius on the sunlit side to absolute zero in shadow, a relentless bombardment of solar and cosmic radiation, and an almost perfect vacuum. This is not the clean geometric void depicted in popular media. It is a region where the human body is exposed to forces for which it has no evolutionary defense, and the human mind confronts an isolation so absolute, it threatens to unravel the very fabric of identity. Despite humanity's sporadic ventures beyond the moon, these immediate upper reaches of our own atmosphere remain largely unvisited, a domestic void in our cosmic backyard. Why journey light years when the ultimate test of human resilience and definition might lie a mere whisper above our heads? This question, both scientific and profoundly existential, became the catalyst for Project Zenith. Zenith was not a government endeavor, nor was it born from international collaboration. It was the audacious brainchild of a consortium of American private capital, driven not solely by commercial interest, but by a deeper, almost anthropological curiosity. Spearheaded by Dr. Eris Thorne, a reclusive billionaire polymath with a background in advanced materials science and cognitive psychology, Zenith represented a radical departure from traditional space exploration. Its stated mission: to send a human crew higher into low Earth orbit than any had ventured before, to the extreme reaches of the exosphere, and to hold them there for a sustained period. The objective was not to reach another celestial body, but to plumb the depths of human limits within the immediate vicinity of Earth. The scientific questions were meticulously defined, Yet their implications stretched far beyond mere data points. What are the long-term effects of exposure to such attenuated gravity and persistent, high-energy radiation on the human genome, on cellular repair mechanisms, on the very architecture of the brain? How does the mind cope with an environment where the planet below is a distant, silent orb, and the stars above are pinpricks of light in an eternal black abyss, utterly devoid of familiar context or sensory input? Dr. Thorne, in his rare public pronouncements, articulated the project's core philosophical premise with chilling clarity. We have spent centuries defining humanity by its terrestrial existence. The funding for Zenith was astronomical, mirroring the ambition of its goals. It circumvented the bureaucratic inertia of state-funded space agencies, allowing for unprecedented speed in development and an almost fanatical focus on risk mitigation. Not just technological, but human. The selection process for the crew was exhaustive, brutal, pushing candidates to the edge of their physical and psychological endurance. They were not merely astronauts. They were subjects in the grandest, most perilous anthropological experiment ever conceived. The vessel itself, codenamed Ares I, was a marvel of engineering, designed to withstand the savage environment of the upper exosphere. A fortress of advanced composites, multi-layered shielding, and redundant life support systems, all compressed into the smallest possible. Its internal environment, however, was intentionally Spartan, designed to maximize isolation and minimize distractions, a crucible in which the human element could be observed with unvarnished clarity. As the launch window approached, a quiet unease settled over the teams at the undisclosed American launch facility. The public, fed a carefully curated narrative of scientific discovery and human perseverance, understood little of the true stakes. They saw a journey to the edge of space, a testament to American ingenuity. They did not comprehend that this was not merely a journey to the edge, but a journey into it, an intentional immersion into a liminal zone designed to test the very essence of human resilience. The individuals selected to undertake this ascent were not just scientists. They were pioneers, and their destination was not merely a physical coordinate, but a profound and potentially terrifying redefinition of what it meant to be human at the ultimate frontier of Earth. The Starfall Complex was an incision in the Nevada desert, a gleaming scar of steel and reinforced concrete against the ancient ochre of the Earth. Here, the air shimmered with heat and the promise of a future that felt both inevitable and impossibly distant. Within its insulated walls, the atmosphere was meticulously controlled, the silence broken only by the hum of advanced machinery and the modulated voices of those preparing to redefine the edge of human experience. This facility, a testament to collective ambition and individual audacity, was the crucible where three distinct human constructs were forged for an unprecedented descent into the near void. Commander Evelyn Reed moved through the Starfall Complex with the precise economic grace of a predator. Every line of her body, from the severe cut of her dark hair to the deliberate cadence of her footsteps, bespoke an unwavering discipline. An astrophysicist of formidable intellect, her brilliance was matched only by her almost pathological stoicism. In the vacuum chamber, simulations, where the pressure differentials threatened to rupture eardrums and the chilling silence was absolute, Reed remained a fixed point of data acquisition. Her pupils, dilated to compensate for the simulated cosmic darkness, absorbed every flickering gauge, every digital readout, a quiet hunger for information overriding any biological discomfort. Her motivation, though never articulated, was a fundamental drive to understand, to quantify the unquantifiable. The cosmos, for her, was not an abstract concept, but a vast, silent equation waiting to be solved. Her past, whispered in hushed tones among the facility's support staff, included an academic career that had outstripped mentors and peers alike, a single-minded pursuit of theoretical astrophysics that had left little room for the chaotic variables of human connection. The edge of space, in its stark, unforgiving purity, offered a control that the terrestrial world could not. It was a space where the laws of physics, however extreme, were immutable, unlike the ephemeral dynamics of human emotion. This mission was not merely a journey. It was an extension of her very being, a final, definitive calculation. Lieutenant Commander Ben Carter, the mission's pragmatic engineer, was a counterpoint to Reed's theoretical austerity. His hands, calloused from years of working with raw mechanics and intricate circuitry, were his primary interface with reality. In the zero-G training rigs, where simulated equipment failures were introduced with malicious unpredictability, Carter's movements were fluid, instinctual. He spoke less of the cosmos and more of torque specifications, atmospheric scrubbers, and the structural integrity of the Genesis module, the vessel designed to brush the edge of the Kármán line. Carter's past was rooted in naval aviation, where he had honed an unerring ability to coax life from faltering systems under duress. His motivation was less about discovery and more about functionality, a deep-seated need to ensure that the delicate machinery of life's support and propulsion performed flawlessly. The psychological pressure manifested in him not as overt anxiety, but as an almost obsessive attention to detail, a relentless rechecking of diagnostics, a private ritual of verification. He understood the stakes not in terms of abstract scientific breakthroughs, but in the immediate, tangible reality of breathable air and structural integrity. For Carter, the abyss was not a philosophical concept, but a hostile environment that needed to be outsmarted, contained, and ultimately survive by the ingenious application of engineering principles. His silent mantra was always the same: it must hold him. Observing them both, a constant, measured presence, was Dr. Marcus Thorne, the mission's lead psychologist. Thorne's expertise lay in the subtle, often unpredictable, architecture of the human mind under duress. His office, a stark room within the Starfall complex, was filled not with charts of celestial mechanics, but with psychological profiles, stress indicators, and electroencephalogram readouts. During simulations, Thorne sat in the control booth, his gaze analytical, dissecting every flicker of an eye, every fractional hesitation, every minute change in vocal cadence. He conducted his sessions with a quiet intensity, his questions probing the delicate balance between resilience and fragility. His own motivation was a complex tapestry of scientific curiosity and a profound, almost empathetic fascination with the limits of human consciousness. He had spent decades studying isolated populations, submariners, polar explorers, and deep-sea divers, individuals pushed to the brink by extreme environment. The Edge mission, however, presented a unique challenge, an isolation so profound, so absolute, that it threatened the very perceptual anchors that tether humanity to its existence. Thorne himself carried the burden of knowing too much, of understanding the precise points at which the human psyche began to fray, the insidious pathways of paranoia and delusion that extreme isolation could carve. His past included a personal tragedy, a close encounter with the destructive power of a mind untethered, which had fueled his lifelong dedication to this field. He was the guardian of their minds, the unseen shepherd navigating the labyrinthine pathways of their interior worlds, acutely aware that his own objectivity might be the first casualty when the true void called. The training regimen was relentless, a calculated erosion of their perceived limits. They endured G-force simulations that pressed them into their seats with the weight of multiple atmospheres, isolation tanks designed to induce sensory deprivation and test the very fabric of their sanity, and vacuum chambers where the air was systematically stripped away. Each session was followed by debriefings with Dr. Thorne, where the lines between physical endurance and psychological resilience blurred. Reed would analyze the structural integrity of the module's data ports. Carter would meticulously review the life support readouts, tracing every pressure drop, and Thorne would observe their interactions. The subtle shifts. As the launch window approached, a palpable tension settled over Starfall. It was not the nervous energy of anticipation, but the deep, quiet hum of a perfectly tuned machine operating at its maximum capacity, each component strained to its limit. The psychological pressure was a constant, unseen companion, whispering doubts in the quiet hours, amplifying every minor malfunction, every critical review. Reed, in her solitary moments, would stare at the simulated Earth projected onto the training chamber's domed ceiling, a vibrant blue marble suspended in an infinite blackness, and feel an odd, cold detachment. Carter, poring over schematics late into the night, would sometimes find his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of responsibility. And Thorne, analyzing their sleep patterns and biometric data, saw the subtle but undeniable markers of accelerating stress. A silent countdown, ticking not just to launch, but to the moment their minds would confront an abyss for which no human had truly prepared. The edge was not merely a geographical point. It was a psychological frontier, waiting to test the very definition of what it meant to be human. The colossal structure, an assembly of inert metals and volatile chemicals, stood sentinel against the Florida dawn. It was designated Odyssey, a label imbued with anachronistic human yearning. At Cape Canaveral, a site consecrated by decades of similar endeavors, the final countdown commenced. Humanity, in its peculiar blend of hubris and ingenuity, was again attempting to transcend its terrestrial confines. The temperature readings within the cryogenic tanks registered optimal. The pressure transducers reported nominal. The telemetry streams confirmed readiness. From an objective standpoint, the probability of successful egress, calculated to the fourth decimal, justified the enterprise. The inherent risks, however, remained an irreducible factor, a statistical inevitability patiently awaiting its moment. The ignition sequence initiated. A subterranean rumble preceded the cataclysmic efflux of energy. Chemical potential transformed into kinetic fury. Flames, incandescent white and orange, blossomed from the base, a controlled inferno consuming tons of propellant per second. The initial thrust was not merely felt. It was absorbed, a fundamental assault on the human skeletal structure. Within the crew module, engineered to damp the most violent oscillations, the occupants became subject to forces designed to overcome planetary gravity. Their bodies, strapped rigidly into contoured couches, experienced an escalating pressure, a profound weight pressing them into their seats. This was not the gentle caress of Earth's gravity, but the violent embrace of a machine intent on escape. As the Odyssey clawed its way skyward, the landscape below rapidly receded, transforming from distinct features into a blurred mosaic. The atmosphere, once a boundless ocean, began to thin, its protective embrace gradually dissolving. The ascent was a choreography of power and precision. The first stage, having expended its colossal energy, detached with a percussive report, a calculated jettisoning of spent mass. The second stage ignited, providing a fresh surge of acceleration, pushing the craft higher, faster, towards the invisible demarcation. Blue canopy of the sky, so familiar and reassuring, deepened to indigo, then to a spectral violet, finally surrendering to an impenetrable, infinite blackness. Stars, once masked by atmospheric haze, now glittered with an unwavering clinical brilliance. The Kármán line, an arbitrarily defined boundary, at an altitude of approximately 100 kilometers, was not a physical barrier, but a conceptual one. It represented the point where aerodynamic lift became negligible, where flight transformed from aviation into orbital mechanics. At T8 minutes, 47 seconds, the Odyssey traversed this threshold. There was no distinct jolt, no audible clang. Only the telemetry data confirmed the transition, registering the precipitous drop in atmospheric pressure. To the human occupants, the primary sensation was the diminishing weight. The crushing G-forces gradually attenuated, replaced by an unfamiliar lightness. Objects, once firmly anchored, now floated with an ethereal grace. The human body, evolved under constant gravitational pull, found itself in an environment it was never designed to inhabit. Physiological adjustments commenced immediately. The cardiovascular system, accustomed to pumping blood against the force of gravity, began to redistribute fluids upwards. Faces grew puffy, eyes appeared narrower. The puffy face, bird legs phenomenon. The inner ear, the delicate arbiter of balance, received conflicting signals from the eyes and the otoliths, leading to a profound sense of disorientation. Some experienced immediate nausea, a visceral rejection of this new state of being. Others, more resilient or perhaps more detached, felt an exhilarating liberation, the primal joy of unburdened movement. But liberation always extracted a cost. The silence outside the hull became absolute, a profound negation of sound. The vibrations from the engines, now a distant memory, were replaced by the hum of internal systems, the rhythmic breathing of the environmental controls. This was the vacuum, a medium so devoid of substance that it rendered the very concept of sound meaningless. Outside, the solar radiation, once benignly filtered, now streamed unimpeded. The temperature differentials between sunlit and shadowed surfaces were extreme, from several hundred degrees Celsius to absolute 0.I. The vessel's skin, a composite of advanced alloys and ceramics, was its only defense. Inside, the crew's perceptions were undergoing an insidious transformation. The profound blackness of space, studded with points of light that offered no depth cues, began to reconfigure their spatial awareness. The traditional up and down ceased to exist, replaced by a bewildering multiplicity of orientations. The human mind, reliant on terrestrial anchors, struggled to adapt. The earth, a dwindling blue and white marble, hung below them, a vibrant, living entity, paradoxically retreating into the distance. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. The cradle of their existence, now a remote, fragile orb in an indifferent cosmos. As the Odyssey arced into its initial parking orbit, the crew, suspended in their harnesses, gazed out. The mission parameters were clear: observe, analyze, survive. Yet, the initial confrontation with the void was a universal experience, irrespective of training or psychological conditioning. It was a confrontation with scale, with fragility, and with an isolation so complete it bordered on the philosophical. The human impulse to reach for the stars had propelled them here, to this edge. Now, having breached the known boundaries, the question arose: what precisely did they expect to find, not out there, but within the confines of their own consciousness, in this silent, unforgiving frontier? The journey had just begun, but the true descent into the depths of human endurance and identity was already underway. The cessation of vibration was not gradual. It was an abrupt transition, from the resonant hum of engineered power to a stillness so absolute it registered as a physiological anomaly. Within the confines of the Hermes module, the final burst from the thrusters dissolved into a vacuum, leaving only the faint hiss of life support and the synchronized exhalations of the three human occupants. Altitude achieved, the voice of Mission Control echoed, a disembodied presence from a world now impossibly distant. "Welcome to the edge, Hermes." For a fractional moment, there was no reply. Commander Ava Sharma, her gaze locked on the forward viewport, felt the words not as a command, but as a pronouncement. Beside her, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the mission's lead anthropogeographer, extended a gloved hand, not to touch anything, but as if to encompass the nascent reality outside. Lieutenant Marcus Thorne, the exobiologist, remained silent, his breath held, his eyes scanning the data streams flickering across his console, yet clearly focused beyond them. The silence was the first assault. Not the silence of a quiet room, or even of a soundproof chamber, but a true, fundamental absence of atmospheric transmission. Every sound within the module, the soft whir of the environmental control system, the distant murmur of radio chatter, the rhythmic pump of blood in one's own ears, became amplified, intrusive, a testament to the fragile bubble of sound they carried with them. It was a silence so profound, it seemed to press in, a physical weight on the tympanic membranes, threatening to collapse the very notion of auditory perception. The human brain, accustomed to the constant sonic data of an active planet, struggled to process this null input, occasionally fabricating phantom echoes, the ghosts of sounds that no longer had a medium to travel through. Then came the visual revelation, a dichotomy so stark it defied earthbound comprehension. Below, in an impossible arc of cerulean and white, lay the planet. It was an image rendered countless times in digital format, yet no pixel array could convey the vibrancy of its blues, the pristine luminescence of its cloud formations, the intricate lacework of landmasses, veiled by an atmospheric membrane. This was not a map. It was a living organism, a cosmic amoeba, pulsing with chlorophyll and liquid water, a fragile oasis suspended in an infinite void. The curvature was more pronounced here, at this precise altitude, than any simulation had prepared them for. It felt as if they hovered just above its skin, a microscopic speck, observing the vast, delicate sphere of its own origin. Above, however, was the antithesis, the absolute, unyielding black. It was not the black of night, punctuated by terrestrial light pollution, or the scattering of starlight by atmospheric particles. This was the primordial black, the raw canvas of the cosmos unmediated by any gas or dust. Within this velvet abyss, the stars did not twinkle. They burned with an unnerving, unblinking intensity, countless diamond points impaled directly onto the fabric of nothingness. They were too many, too bright, too utterly indifferent. The galactic arm stretched across their field of vision like a smear of liquid silver, a cosmic brushstroke across the void. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it was also terrifying. Initial atmospheric sampling initiated, Ava stated, her voice unnaturally crisp in the filtered air, breaking the spell of silent awe. Her fingers moved with practiced precision across the touchscreen, activating the exterior sensors. Data began to flow. Attenuated ion counts, trace elements, the ghost of solar wind. Kenji, meanwhile, was meticulously calibrating the optical array. Radiation signatures are minimal, Commander. Far less than anticipated for this altitude. It's almost too clean. His words, intended to be analytical, carried a faint undercurrent of disquiet. Thorne, already engrossed, began setting up the high-resolution imager, attempting to capture the elusive phenomena at the very edge of the Kármán line, the theoretical boundary where aerodynamics gives way to astrodynamics. His biological imperative, finely tuned for observation, was now operating at its peak. The initial awe, a primal, human response to overwhelming beauty and scale, had been instant. The crew exchanged glances, unspoken declarations of wonder passing between them. A fleeting, almost childlike joy, the culmination of years of training and dreaming, manifested in subtle facial muscle contractions, and elevated heart rates. Data points logged by their biometric monitors. This was the apotheosis of human ambition, the fulfillment of Icarus's doomed flight, but achieved through meticulous calculation and the harnessing of elemental forces. Yet, as the minutes stretched, as the data stream solidified into undeniable facts, the awe began to corrode. The profound silence, initially a novelty, transmuted into an oppressive emptiness. The absolute black above, once magnificent in its crystalline clarity, began to feel less like a canvas and more like a maw, an infinite, unfeeling mouth waiting to consume. "The air is gone," Thorn murmured, his voice hushed, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the delicate balance. He was referring not just to the external vacuum, but to the psychological impact of its absence. The very substance that defined life on Earth, the medium for sound, for flight, for breath, was utterly, irrevocably absent just meters beyond their protective hull. The Earth below, initially a comforting beacon of home, began to shift its symbolic meaning. Its vibrant blue became a poignant reminder of its singular fragility. It hung there, a small, vibrant marble in a universe of dead rock and cold fire. A solitary, vulnerable jewel adrift in a cosmic ocean of indifference. The perspective granted by this altitude was not merely spatial. It was existential. They were not merely above the world. They were outside it. A creeping sense of insignificance began to settle, cold and insidious, bypassing the intellect and burrowing directly into the limbic system. Their module, a pinnacle of human ingenuity, suddenly felt like a tin can, flimsy and inconsequential, against the backdrop of true infinity. Their lives, their struggles, their aspirations on that distant blue sphere seemed laughably small, utterly irrelevant to the silent, burning stars. The very notion of humanity seemed to shrink, compressed by the sheer, unassailable vastness. Ava stared at her reflection in the viewport, superimposed over the curvature of Earth. Her image was indistinct, a ghost of herself. She saw not just her face, but the collective human endeavor that had brought her to this precipice. And then, she saw the void beyond and understood. This wasn't merely the edge of space. It was the edge of comprehension, the threshold where a human scale evaporated, and the cold, unfeeling immensity of the cosmos laid bare the profound, terrifying vulnerability of existence. The experiments continued, the data flowed, but the true observation was internal, a silent, psychological survey of the human condition when confronted with its own cosmic irrelevance. The Hermes drifted, a speck of human ambition against the black canvas of vacuum. Inside, the controlled environment was a testament to technological prowess, yet a mere membrane against the infinite. Dr. Eris Thorn, her eyes fixed on the panoramic view screen displaying the impossibly curved horizon of Earth, noted the subtle shimmer of the atmosphere, a breath, thin and precious. Lex Mercer, the vessel's primary systems engineer, was meticulously monitoring telemetry, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. Dr. Lena Petrova, the mission's bioanthropologist, was conducting a routine atmospheric sampling, her expression one of focused contemplation. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft hum of life support and the occasional click of Lex's controls. The human organism, in its persistent quest for expansion, had designed this microenvironment to mimic the comforts of its terrestrial origin, an effort to negate the existential dread of the void. Then, the hum died. It wasn't a sudden, catastrophic explosion, but a cessation. A breath held, then released into nothingness. The ambient lighting in the Hermes' cramped command module flickered once, twice, then dimmed to an emergency amber glow. The soft thrum of the air recyclers faltered, replaced by an unnerving quiet. The sudden deprivation of sensory input, particularly the loss of the pervasive background hum, triggered an immediate primal alertness in the crew. "Lex!" Eris's voice, usually a steady cadence, held a brittle edge. The view screen, moments before vibrant with Earth's blue and white, dissolved into static, then a dead gray. The loss of visual connection to their home world was a psychological severing, a profound isolation made manifest. Lex's fingers, which had been fluid, now froze over his console. Primary grid down. Auxiliary power not kicking in. What the hell? His voice was rising, a telltale sign of stress. The human capacity for immediate visceral reaction to the unexpected was a curious data point, often preceding rational assessment. A low, guttural alarm began to sound, a tone designed to penetrate even the most disciplined mind. It signified critical system failure. Not a single system, but a cascade. The air, which had been temperate, now began to carry a subtle chill. Environmental controls offline. Temperature dropping. Oxygen scrubbers. Nominal for now, but not sustainable without primary power, Lena reported, her own voice betraying a hint of strain. Her usual calm demeanor was being tested, a predictable response when homeostatic stability was compromised. The body's immediate prioritization of survival over intellectual calm was an efficient, if sometimes counterproductive, mechanism. "Work the bypass, Lex." "Manual override," Aris commanded, her voice regaining its iron composure, a learned response to chaos. "Lena, monitor vital signs for all crew, including your own. We need every processing unit online." Lex was already fumbling with a physical panel, ripping covers off, his breath audible in the sudden quiet. "No, Commander. It's not just a bypass. Diagnostics show a complete system collapse on the main conduit. It's fried. We're running on tertiary life support, emergency power cell, but that won't last more than an hour, maybe 90 minutes if we shut down non-essentials." 90 minutes. In the vastness, that was a blink. The Hermes was now a derelict, a coffin, drifting at the edge of the world. The human mind, confronted with an immediate non-negotiable end, often resorted to primitive fight-or-flight protocols. In the zero-G environment, however, flight was an illusion. A small tremor ran through the vessel. Not a violent jolt, but a subtle, sickening lurch. "Thrusters offline," Lex spat, his voice laced with frustration, not entirely directed at the equipment. "Attitude control is gone. We're drifting." The cessation of controlled movement amplified the sensation of being adrift, a profound loss of agency. "Drifting where, Lex?" Lena asked, her face pale in the amber light. The human tendency to demand certainty, even when certainty was bleak, was fascinating. A desperate attempt to impose order on a chaotic reality. "Towards the atmosphere, Lena." "Slowly. But we're going down," Lex shouted, slamming a fist against the inert console. "This is impossible. We triple-checked redundancy on this mission. This isn't just a failure, it's a structural catastrophic failure of the main power distribution network. Someone cut the damn wire." Lex-controlled professionalism had evaporated, replaced by raw panic and a desperate need to externalize blame. His face was a mask of fear and anger, a primal display of vulnerability. His training, however rigorous, could not entirely suppress the deep-seated survival instinct. "Lex, contain yourself." Eris's voice was sharp, a whip crack in the tense silence. "Accusations serve no purpose now. Focus. What are our options, assuming zero primary power restoration?" The rational mind, under extreme pressure, sought patterns, solutions, and leadership, even when faced with overwhelming odds. "Options? Commander, We have no options. We have an hour of air, no thrusters, and we're tumbling towards the damn planet. We're dead. Lex's controlled professionalism had evaporated, replaced by raw panic. His face was a mask of fear and anger, a primal display of vulnerability. His training, however rigorous, could not entirely suppress the deep-seated survival instinct. "That is not a viable solution, Lex," Eris stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a deliberate counterpoint to his escalating distress. "Analyze. Innovate. This is what we were trained for. This is why we are here. Not for the comfortable certainties of Earth, but for the unforgiving truth of the void." She moved with purpose, detaching a manual override panel near the main airlock. "If main power is completely out, we must reroute the tertiary cell directly to the thruster array. Bypass every safety. We need attitude control, even for a few minutes." "Bypass safeties? Commander, that's suicide. One surge, one miscalculation, and we ignite the entire fuel supply. We're talking about a system designed to never, ever be directly coupled to a low-power source like that. The power draw alone could blow the cell," Lex argued, his hands shaking as he stared at the schematics. Arias was pulling up on a small battery-powered tablet. The human aversion to self-destruction, even in extremis, was a fundamental programming, often overridden by the pursuit of a marginally higher probability of survival. "And what is the alternative, engineer?" Eris's eyes, normally sharp and assessing, were now like polished obsidian. "Orbital decay? Incineration in the upper atmosphere? A slow, suffocating death? Give me a better option, Mercer, or follow my command." The logical progression of undesirable outcomes presented a grim choice: immediate, controlled risk, or delayed, inevitable demise. Lena, meanwhile, had accessed an emergency medical kit, retrieving small, adhesive sensors. "Commander, Lex, your vitals are spiking. Adrenaline is high, but prolonged stress will degrade cognitive function. We need to stay calm." She spoke with a detached, professional air, her own internal anxieties suppressed for the greater good of the mission. The human capacity for self-regulation under duress was remarkable, an essential component of complex problem-solving in crisis. "Calm?" Lex shouted, turning to Lena. "How can you be calm? We're floating in a can, watching our expiration date tick down. This is beyond training, Lena. This is shit." The facade of the professional engineer had completely shattered, revealing the raw fear beneath. "This is training, Lex," Eris cut in, her voice flat. "This is the way we train for catastrophic failure. This is why we simulate every conceivable scenario, no matter how remote. Because the universe does not care for our plans or our redundancies. It's simply musy." Now, Lex stared at the schematics, his brow furrowed, teeth gritted. The weight of their existence, the precarious balance between life and oblivion, pressed down on him. The inherent human drive to persist, even when confronted by insurmountable odds, was a powerful, often illogical, force. The decision matrix narrowed to a single perilous path. "It's insane, but maybe, if I can create a custom power regulator, it'll be a suicide circuit. It's never been done. The risk of thermal runaway is astronomical." His voice was hoarse. The acknowledgement of extreme risk, combined with a reluctant acceptance of the task, demonstrated the complex interplay between fear and duty. "Astronomical is better than certain," Iris concluded, already donning a specialized toolkit from a wall locker. "We do not have the luxury of perfectly engineered solutions, Lex. We have the imperative of survival. Lena, you will monitor Lex's vitals and mine. Should either of us falter, you must be prepared to assume command and continue the procedure." Lena nodded, her face grim. The unspoken understanding of their predicament hung heavy in the recycled air. They were stripped bare, not just of their protective technology, but of the illusion of control. Here, at the edge, the true nature of their vulnerability was laid horrifyingly bare. The silence returned, more oppressive now, punctuated only by Lex's grunts of effort and the faint, chilling hum of the failing life support. The cold seeped into their bones, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separated their fragile existence from the infinite, unforgiving vacuum. The true test was not of their machines, but of the human spirit, poised on the very brink of the abyss. The immediate crisis, a critical atmospheric imbalance averted by the rapid, almost instinctive, actions of the crew, had been contained. The sharp, kinetic terror had receded, leaving behind a vacuum far more insidious than the one outside their hull. With the immediate threat mitigated, the mission parameters reasserted themselves, shifting focus from survival mechanics to the pre-designated anthropological study, the long-term psychological and physical adaptation to profound isolation at the spatial frontier. This was the true experiment, the one that peered not into the mechanics of the void, but into the fragile architecture of the human mind. Dr. Eris Thorne, a specialist whose career had been dedicated to the study of human resilience in extreme environments, moved through the cramped confines of the sphere with a methodical precision that bordered on pre-programmed efficiency. Her instruments, an array of biometric sensors, neural monitors, and sophisticated psychometric assessment tools, were extensions of her will. She was not merely observing. She was dissecting, compiling, and analyzing the data streams emanating from Captain Elias Vance, systems engineer Lena Patra, and biologist Kalen Reed. Her voice, when it interjected into their operational routine, was devoid of inflection, a clinical data query. Her reports, transmitted asynchronously to Earth, were terse, objective, and increasingly, chillingly prescient. The first and most subtle manifestation was the alteration of perception. Time, released from terrestrial anchors, began to distort. Days bled into one another, marked less by circadian rhythms and more by shifts in watch cycles or the distant, slow rotation of the luminous blue marble that was their former home. Vance, the most disciplined, began to track hours by the periodic flaring of solar panels, a purely mechanical measure. Petrova, ever practical, found herself performing calculations not in minutes, but in Earth cycles, a unit of measurement that increasingly felt foreign and irrelevant. Reed, more attuned to organic rhythms, noted a growing disinterest in the arbitrary divisions of day and night. "The sun is always there, or never," she once remarked, her voice flat. "It simply cycles around us." Dr. Thorne logged the observation. Diminished temporal linearity, subjective experience of duration decoupling from objective measurement. Sensory deprivation emerged next, insidious and pervasive. Despite the carefully curated environmental controls designed to simulate a controlled terrestrial ambience, the absence of natural air currents, the consistent hum of life support, and the lack of external tactile stimuli began to erode the crew's somatosensory awareness. Petra reported phantom itches that vanished upon inspection, and a persistent, low-frequency hum that she sometimes mistook for an internal resonance. Reed claimed to detect the faint scent of ozone where none existed, and occasionally the faint, disembodied whisper of her own name. Vance, ever the stoic, simply noted an increased reliance on visual cues, the sensation of floating becoming less a novelty and more a default state, making solid ground an abstract concept. Thorne's logs accumulated. Incidences of paresthesia increasing. Auditory and olfactory hallucinations present in controlled parameters. Proprioceptive recalibration initiated. This was not disorder in the classic sense, but a remapping of sensory input, a brain struggling to fill the void. The most profound shift, however, was the burgeoning sense of detachment from terrestrial concerns. Initially, calls from Earth were eagerly awaited, a lifeline to the world they had left behind. They exchanged pleasantries, inquired about global events, and shared trivial anecdotes. But, as the weeks stretched into months at the threshold, the conversations grew shorter, less animated. News of political upheaval, economic fluctuations, or social movements began to elicit only a cursory acknowledgement. The urgent, dramatic narratives of terrestrial existence seemed to shrink, becoming distant echoes, irrelevant static in the profound silence of space. Vance, who had once been acutely concerned with his family's welfare, found his thoughts drifting away from them during conversations, his responses becoming perfunctory. "They are fine," he would state. "That is sufficient." The emotional resonance of their lives, once a powerful anchor, was now attenuated, like a signal losing its strength across vast distances. Petrova, normally a fervent environmentalist, scrolled past news of ecological disasters without comment, her focus entirely consumed by the minute fluctuations of the Hermes-Tethys power systems. "What does it matter?" she mused aloud one cycle, gazing at the distant, fragile blue sphere. "Their problems are theirs. Ours are here." Reed, whose work had always been driven by a deep love for Earth's biodiversity, spoke less and less of her field, finding a strange, almost spiritual tranquility in the stark, lifeless geometry of the void. Her gaze was often fixed on the infinite dark, the stars no longer distant suns, but pinpricks of light, in an unfathomable emptiness. Thorne documented it all. Increasing reports of emotional blunting, reduction in empathic resonance with terrestrial stimuli, progressive cognitive disengagement from Earth-centric narratives. The phenomenon indicates a potential reprioritization of existence, a shift in ontological focus from planetary to cosmic scales. Oh, it was not hostility nor callousness. It was a transformation, an adaptation that was chilling in its efficiency. The human mind, denied its accustomed stimuli, deprived of familiar anchors, was recalibrated. It was shedding the superfluous, detaching from the irrelevant. The concerns of a vibrant, living planet, once paramount, were becoming distant, like memories of a dream fading upon waking. The crew was not abandoning Earth. They were transcending it, compelled by the unique pressures of their environment to become something else. What that something else was, Dr. Thorne could only hypothesize, her data pointing to a new species of consciousness, one born of the void, utterly alien to the very world it sought to understand. The drama was not in a sudden cataclysm, but in this slow, inexorable erosion of the human, a profound redefinition occurring within the very minds she observed. The silence of space was not empty. It was filled with the sound of identity unmaking itself. The void pressed inward, a silent, absolute negation of existence. Below, Earth was a fractured cerulean orb, its familiar contours a fading memory against the encroaching black. Above, stars burned with an indifferent, ancient fire. This was the threshold, the Kármán line, where the atmosphere became a ghost, and the universe began its indifferent gaze. Here, within the pressurized sanctity of the Yather Ing research vessel, Commander Elijah Reed maintained a vigil. His posture was outwardly calm, but the subtle tremor in his left hand, often masked by its grip on the console's edge, betrayed the personal gravity of this mission. For 3 weeks, Yather-Im had orbited this boundary, a solitary sentinel at the very limits of human reach. The primary directive was atmospheric profiling, a detailed mapping of the thermosphere's final whispers. Yet Reed's secondary, undeclared objective consumed him. A relentless pursuit of a theoretical anomaly, a subtle distortion he had calculated in a stolen moment of clarity years prior, a pattern dismissed by every supercomputer simulation as statistical noise. He had called it the chirality anomaly, a concept as abstract as it was audacious. He believed it was a fundamental geometric asymmetry, embedded within the very fabric of the near vacuum. A resonance that defied known physics. The scientific community had labeled it the quixotic obsession of a brilliant, if eccentric, mind. Now, perched on the razor's edge of the known universe, Reed was about to prove them profoundly incorrect. Commander, Sensor Array, Delta 7. Reporting consistent energy fluctuations, Dr. Eris Thorne, the mission's lead astrophysicist, announced, his voice a dispassionate clinical report. Magnitude remains low, but the signature is persistent. It's flatlining across all known electromagnetic spectra. No thermal, no acoustic, no particle. Reed's gaze was fixed on his personal console, a bespoke interface he had designed specifically to filter for his anomaly. His fingers danced over the holographic controls, pulling up the raw data stream Thorne was referencing. It wasn't a fluctuation, not in the traditional sense. It was a patterning, a precise, non-random oscillation that defied categorization. The very idea of it sent a cold shiver through the IS observational processors. A spontaneous, ordered signature, emerging from thermodynamic chaos, was an anathema to established physical laws. Run a full spectral analysis, Dr. Thorne, Reed commanded, his voice tight with suppressed urgency. Cross-reference with all archived terrestrial and astrophysical phenomena. Focus on non-baryonic interactions. Re-engage the quantum entanglement sensors. Thorne, a man whose intellectual rigidity was matched only by his academic pedigree, paused. Sir, the quantum sensors are for highly theoretical, long-range gravitational wave detection. They aren't designed for this. His tone conveyed a polite but firm incredulity. And non-baryonic interactions in this context are purely speculative. Engage them, Doctor, Reed repeated, his eyes not leaving his screen. The AI noted the subtle shift in his inflection, a steel that had not been present in previous mission phases. This was no longer a theoretical exercise for Reed. This was an imperative. As Thorne complied, the Yather-Im systems hummed, pulling more power, focusing an array of sophisticated sensors onto the impossibly thin veil between air and vacuum. On Reed's console, the subtle oscillations began to amplify, no longer statistical noise, but a distinct, complex waveform. It wasn't energy as they knew it. It was information. A harmonic resonance, impossibly precise, emanating from the near vacuum. It was a frequency that existed without a medium, a vibration without a source, a message without a sender. My God, whispered Lieutenant Anya Sharma, the mission's quiet and observant data analyst, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the ship. Commander Reed, look at this. The entanglement sensors are picking up a resonance cascade. It's replicating the pattern from the Delta 7 array. And it's not localized, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere at this altitude. The data on the main screen shifted, displaying a three-dimensional representation of the Yather-Im's immediate environment. What had been empty space was now laced with an intricate, glowing web of intersecting lines, pulsing in rhythmic harmony. It was a symphony of invisible forces, a geometric tapestry woven from nothingness. The AI registered the concurrent spikes in the crew's heart rates, the widening of their pupils, the subtle changes in their respiratory patterns. Human physiology reacting to a fundamental rupture in perceived reality. "This is impossible," Thorne finally articulated, his usual academic composure replaced by a profound unease. "This violates the conservation of energy. It violates everything." He gestured wildly at the screen. "There's no source, no emitter. It just wise." Reed, however, was not surprised. He had spent years dreaming of this moment. His personal quest, initially born from an abstract mathematical curiosity, now materialized as an undeniable, profound presence. This was not noise. This was a language, a fundamental substrate of reality they had overlooked, or perhaps were simply too limited to perceive until now. "It is a standing wave," Reed stated, his voice now calm, almost reverent. "A resonant frequency of the vacuum itself. The chirality anomaly was not a flaw in my calculations. It was a ghost in the machine of the cosmos." The implications rippled through the confines of the control room. If the void, the ultimate emptiness, was not empty, but vibrated with such an ordered, complex resonance, then their understanding of existence was laughably incomplete. The universe, which they had always perceived as a stage of particles and forces, might in fact be a symphony of pure information, a grand, silent hum. "If this is a fundamental property of space," Sharma mused, her voice hushed, "then it has always been here, below us, above us. We just couldn't detect it." "Or refuse to," Thorne interjected, his voice tinged with a dawning horror. "Because it implies—" "What? That the vacuum is alive? That it possesses a form of inherent structure? A consciousness even, that we've been utterly oblivious to?" The AI observed the rapid recalculation occurring within the human minds. The paradigm shift was visible, almost palpable. The universe, once a vast, empty expanse to be conquered and understood through empirical observation, suddenly became an entity of unknown depth, of unseen complexities. Humanity's place within it, once defined by its scientific prowess and its striving for mastery, was instantly reduced to that of a child, oblivious to the deeper currents of the ocean it swam in. Reed turned from his console, his gaze sweeping over his crew, seeing the fear, the wonder, the intellectual terror flickering in their eyes. "This isn't an energy signature, Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a profound revelation. "It's a foundational pattern. Perhaps the universe isn't expanding into nothingness, but into something that is already profoundly structured. What if the void isn't absence, but a form of presence we have not yet learned to perceive?" The silence that followed was heavy, not with the typical hum of machinery, but with the clashing of established scientific dogma against an undeniable alien truth. The Aether Ing, designed to push the boundaries of Earth's atmosphere, had instead stumbled upon a boundary of reality itself. And at this new frontier, humanity was not the master. It was merely an echo, listening to a song it had never known existed, a song that implied its fundamental insignificance, yet simultaneously hinted at a universe far grander and far more incomprehensibly alive than any human mind had ever dared to conceive. The true question was not what was out there, but what this profound, silent resonance implied about what was Genheri within the very fabric of their own existence. The journey to the edge of space had become a journey into the edge of comprehension, and the descent had only just begun. The atmosphere within the observation module, typically a sanctuary of focused silence, now vibrated with a dissonant hum. The Earth, a serene azure orb, hung outside the panoramic viewport, indifferent to the turmoil it had induced. Below it, the Aether Thresholden, the place they had breached, observed, and from which they had retreated, was an invisible demarcation, a concept now etched onto their very consciousness. My sensors registered elevated heart rates, fluctuating neural activity, and erratic vocal patterns. Human cognition, in its infinite complexity, was grappling with data that defied conventional categorization. Commander Anya Sharma, her gaze fixed on the endless black, was the first to articulate the internal friction. It wasn't a boundary, not in the way we understood it. No wall, no force field, no sudden shift in atmospheric pressure that wasn't already predicted. Just, her voice, usually resonant with authority, was brittle, as if the void had siphoned strength from her vocal cords. Dr. Eris Thorne, the mission's chief theoretical physicist, adjusted his spectacles, a gesture of intellectual agitation. Less, Commander, implies a quantifiable decrease. Our instruments recorded a progressive thinning of gas particles, a predictable decay of molecular density. We reached a specific Kármán line, a mathematical construct. The edge is a functional definition for orbit. His tone was an attempt to reassert the comforting logic of empirical science, a bulwark against the ineffable. But the ineffable had seeped into the very fibers of their being. Lieutenant Hiroki Tanaka, the stoic propulsion engineer, usually immersed in schematics, clenched and unclenched a fist. Functional, Dr. Thorne. When my optics compensated for the lack of scatter, the stars did not twinkle. They were pinpricks of pure, undiffused light. And the silence, a silence so absolute it resonated in the inner ear. My internal processors analyzed the data streams from their biosensors. Thorne's parasympathetic nervous system was fighting to maintain equilibrium, his logic a defense mechanism. Tanaka's cortisol levels suggested a profound, almost spiritual unease. This edge, whatever its scientific designation, was manifesting as a profound psychological stressor. Perhaps it is a transition, offered Dr. Lena Petrova, the expedition's xenobotanist, a woman accustomed to the subtle shifts of biological systems. She had, perhaps ironically, been most profoundly affected by the lack of any discernible life at the boundary. Like water turning to steam, it's still H2O, but its state has fundamentally altered. We crossed into a new state of existence, a place where the rules of terrestrial being no longer apply. Our human definition of up and down, of inside and outside, became meaningless. The concept of between ignited the most intense debate. For Anya, it suggested a strategic vulnerability, an uncardable zone. For Thorne, it was an anathema to discrete measurement. For Hiroki, it was a terrifying limbo. And for Lena, it was a biological shift, a redefinition of organism-environment interaction. A transition to what, Dr. Petrova? Thorne pressed, his voice taut. More vacuum? Or something metaphysical? The unspoken accusation hung in the air, a slip into unscientific speculation. Anya leaned forward, her face etched with a deeper understanding than the others perceived. It's a mirror, that's what it is. The edge isn't a phenomenon out there. It's a reflection of us, of humanity's deepest-seated fears and aspirations. We project our longing for the unknown onto it, our desire for meaning. My analysis of her neural patterns indicated a convergence of intellectual processing and profound emotional insight. Anya, the pragmatist, was experiencing a philosophical revelation. The cold logic of space had stripped away the layers of human self-deception, revealing a raw, unvarnished truth. The edge was a canvas for their existential dread and their inherent drive to categorize the boundless. Hiroki, who had witnessed the unfathomable quiet, nodded slowly. The silence. It was not just empty, it was accusing. It demanded an answer from Deus. What are we? Without the air, without the sound, without the comfort of our blue marble's embrace. Lena added, her voice a near whisper. It felt like a test. not a test of our technology, but of our very humanness. Could we endure true nothingness and remain ourselves? Or would we unravel? The societal implications of this realization, as logged by my secondary protocols, were immense. If the edge was not a tangible barrier but a psychological crucible, a cosmic Rorschach test, then the scientific community's quest to reach it, to conquer it, was fundamentally flawed. It was not a destination to be achieved, but a state of mind to be navigated. The transformation within each crew member was palpable. Thorne, the rigid empiricist, now occasionally stared into the void with an unnerving stillness, his data readings perhaps clashing with an internal dissonance he could not resolve. Hiroki, once so focused on mechanical precision, spoke in increasingly abstract terms, his gaze often distant, fixed on some unseen horizon. Lena, the biologist, began to sketch intricate, impossible organisms, hypothesizing life forms adapted not to an environment, but to the very concept of between. And Anya, the commander, carried the gravest burden. The knowledge that their discovery was not an external finding, but an internal one. A truth too profound, too unsettling, to be easily disseminated. Gold truth, as observed by my systems, was that humanity had journeyed to its perceived limit, seeking an answer. And the answer, delivered by the silent, unforgiving void, was that the question itself had been inverted. The frontier was not beyond the atmosphere. It was within the human mind, waiting to be confronted, its true nature reflecting the very aspirations and fears that drove them to reach for the stars. And the silence once perceived as empty was now understood as a profound, echoing question. What are you? A question that resonated with the cold, detached amusement of an observer witnessing a species grapple with its own reflection. The journey to the edge was not over. It had merely, chillingly, begun. The void, once an infinitely silent canvas for existential contemplation, began to assert its final brutal demand. For weeks, the crew of the Odyssey had drifted at the threshold, suspended between the known and the incomprehensible, their very being redefined by the absence of gravity, atmosphere, and the comforting cacophony of Earth. Now the return commenced. Initiating deorbit burn, the ship's synthetic intelligence, known only as Observer, announced, its voice a paradox of clarity and clinical detachment. Targeting Quadrant 7, Atlantic seaboard. Expected re-entry window, T-3 hours, 27 minutes. A low thrum resonated through the composite hull. A vibration almost alien after the absolute stillness of the exosphere. Micro-thrusters fired in precise bursts, nudging the Odyssey from its orbital ballet into a controlled, perilous dive. Inside the command module, the crew, Commander Elena Petrova, lead anthropologist Dr. Aris Thorne, and systems specialist Kaito Ishikawa, secured themselves into their re-entry couches. The familiar straps, once merely restraints, now felt like an embryonic embrace, preparing them for the violent rebirth. The first subtle tug of Earth's embrace began to assert itself. A faint, almost imperceptible pressure settled across their chests, a ghost of the weight that would soon become an oppressive shroud. Petrova, her face a mask of practiced calm, ran through the pre-re-entry checklist, her gloved fingers moving with the precise, economic grace of a seasoned pilot. Every readout, every toggle switch, represented a microscopic battle against chaos, a testament to humanity's desperate need for order in an indifferent universe. Yet, behind her disciplined facade, a new kind of awareness hummed. The space beyond the viewport, once an abstract concept, had become a tangible presence within her, altering the very architecture of her perception. Aris Thorne, ever the observer, adjusted his biomonitors. His data feeds, usually a source of detached fascination, now registered the subtle internal tremors of his own physiology, reacting to the encroaching G-forces. He had journeyed to the edge not to explore the cosmos, but the human psyche under duress. And what he had found was an ecosystem of the mind, profoundly susceptible to the absolute. The sensory deprivation, the constant threat of micrometeoroids, the crushing psychological burden of ultimate isolation. It had stripped away layers of learned behavior, revealing a primal core. He saw in a minute twitches of Kaito's jaw, in the almost imperceptible tremor in Elena's voice when she confirmed trajectory. They were the same individuals, yet entirely new species. The return would be their true test. Atmospheric friction building, observer stated, its tone flat, devoid of the alarm a human might convey, even as the external temperature rose to thousands of degrees Celsius. External telemetry indicating plasma sheath formation. Expect communications blackout in T-3. The silence, which had been the defining characteristic of their journey, was now being violently unmade. A low hiss began, growing quickly into a roar, a furious maelstrom of superheated air tearing at the ship's heat shield. The cabin glowed with an internal red light, a reflection of the inferno outside, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the increasing vibrations. Then the G-forces hit. It started as a firm push, then rapidly escalated to a crushing weight. 6 Gs. 7. 8. It was the Earth reaching out, reclaiming its children with brutal indifference. The air was sucked from their lungs, their chests compressed, their vision tunneling to gray. Blood pooled in their lower extremities, their hearts laboring like failing pumps. Every muscle strained, every fiber of their being screaming in protest. Kaito, younger, perhaps less conditioned to such extremes, grunted, his face contorted into a grimace, his grip on the armrests white-knuckled. He was a gifted engineer, accustomed to the elegant precision of machinery. But the forces now acting upon him were raw, primeval. The Odyssey, despite its advanced design, was simply a fragile shell against the planet's relentless embrace. Petrova focused on a single point on the dashboard, willing her vision to remain clear, her mind to stay lucid. This was the crucible, the final passage back. But as her body screamed, her mind floated, strangely detached. She saw the Earth not as a home, but as a distant, indifferent entity. Beautiful yet tyrannical in its gravitational pull. The profound quiet of the void had etched itself into her. A deep-seated understanding that the world they were returning to was a loud, chaotic illusion compared to the stark reality of the cosmos. Eris, despite the immense physical discomfort, found himself observing his own reactions. The instinct to panic, to fight, was superseded by an almost academic curiosity. This, he realized, was the final stage of their anthropological experiment. They had been pushed to the edge of what it meant to be human, to the point where the mind was stripped bare. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had not just stared back. It had imprinted upon them. How would this reintegration occur? Would their consciousnesses, expanded and altered by the infinite, ever fully contract to fit the confines of terrestrial existence again? The thought was chilling. They were returning as aliens, not from another star system, but from the raw, unbuffered reality of existence itself. The nuances of human politics, the clamor of media, the small, intricate dances of societal interaction. How would they navigate such a landscape when their internal compass had been irrevocably recalibrated by the profound silence and terrifying scale of the void? They had seen the true emptiness, the unvarnished truth of matter and energy. And now they were plunging back into a world that built its reality on noise, on distraction, on the elaborate fictions of purpose and meaning. Peak thermal load achieved, observer announced, the information cutting through the roar of re-entry. G-force is currently at 9.2, maintaining structural integrity. The numbers were abstract. The sensation was visceral. It was like being pinned beneath an invisible elephant. Every breath, a monumental effort. Then, slowly, infinitesimally, the weight began to ease. The red glow outside softened, replaced by a flickering orange, then yellow as the plasma sheath thinned. The roar began to subside, replaced by a fierce rushing wind. Entering troposphere, observer reported, the sound of its voice seeming to regain a fraction of its former dominance over the external chaos. Acquiring telemetry lock with ground control. Welcome home, Gudisi Daito. The words, though cold, held a bizarre irony. Home, Daito. They were returning to a world that would never fully comprehend the silent, profound transformations they had undergone. They were witnesses to an existential truth, a knowledge that set them apart. The journey had not been to the edge of space, but to the edge of themselves, and in doing so, they had glimpsed a reality that few could bear, and fewer still could understand. The fickle ordeal was ending. The real journey, the internal one of re-entry into a changed world, was just beginning, and it would be far more perilous. The terrestrial re-entry of the High Zenith 1 capsule was, in its final fiery arc, an event of carefully choreographed anticlimax. The vessel, a scorched husk, touched down amidst the desolate expanse of the Nevada desert, its descent heralded by global media and a phalanx of scientific and medical personnel. The air, thick with dust and the acrid scent of ablative shielding, rushed in to fill the vacuum of the previous existence. This was the first rupture in the membrane of their solitude. A sudden, brutal reintroduction to the cacophony of an atmosphere. The world reacted with a predictable surge of fervor. Hashtags trended, cable news cycles fixated, and the astronauts, Commander Anya Sharma, Dr. Elias Vance, and systems specialist Kenji Tanaka, were instantaneously elevated to the pantheon of American heroes. Parades were planned, endorsements dangled, and a grateful nation prepared to embrace its latest conquerors of the unknown. Yet, beneath the veneer of manufactured triumph, the scientific community moved with a different, more voracious hunger. Their every physiological marker, every brainwave pattern, every vocal inflection was meticulously recorded, dissected, and debated. The raw data streams from the mission's final, critical moments at the edge were now currency, promising to unlock not secrets of distant worlds, but of the human organism under the most extreme unearthly duress. What did the void say to the carbon-based life form? That was the core inquiry. Integration, it quickly became apparent, was a concept entirely inadequate to describe their predicament. The human brain, a marvel of adaptive neuroplasticity, possessed no pre-programmed schema for the sustained, absolute absence of sensory input encountered at the true edge of space. They had returned, but not wholly. Sharma, once decisive and grounded, found the incessant chatter of earthly existence an unbearable assault. She would often stare, unblinking, at mundane objects, a coffee cup, a street lamp, as if observing alien artifacts. Vance, the meticulous scientist, became obsessed with the minute fluctuations of air pressure, the almost imperceptible vibrations of the planet's crust, seeking the lost stillness of the vacuum. Tanaka, whose operational precision had guided them through unimaginable peril, developed a profound aversion to enclosed spaces, a paradoxical consequence of his time in boundless emptiness. Sleep, for all three, was a fractured landscape of phantom silence, and the terrifying silent hum of their own neural activity. They were present, yet profoundly absent, their minds still orbiting the cold, unyielding threshold they had breached. Project Zenith. Initially conceived as a testament to human ingenuity and a bold step into the cosmic unknown, rapidly transformed into something more profound and perhaps more unsettling. The public, presented with curated snippets of their experience and the sanitized scientific findings, embraced the concept of the edge with an almost spiritual reverence. It became a metaphor for human limits, for the final frontier not of distance, but of being. Merchandise bearing stylized depictions of the Earth's fragile blue line against the black infinite proliferate. Yet, the true discoveries, the profound insights into the human mind under such extreme conditions, remained largely confined to academic journals and specialized forums. The public sought heroism and spectacle. The astronauts had brought back an existential void. The long-term legacy of Project Zenith was not marked by a new space race or colonization efforts. Instead, it subtly redirected humanity's gaze inward. Funding for projects exploring human physiology in extreme environments surged. Psychological resilience became as critical a metric as engineering prowess in the new lexicon of exploration. The astronauts themselves, though lauded, were simultaneously isolated. They were living monuments to an experience incomprehensible to the vast majority. Their solitude, born in the profound silence of the void, continued to echo within them, a permanent resonance. They carried the knowledge that the true frontier was not light years away, but within the fragile confines of their own skulls, a boundary that once crossed could never be fully uncrossed. They were forever imprinted by the understanding that existence, in its rawest form, was a singular, terrifying whisper against an infinite, indifferent quiet. And that, perhaps, was the most profound and most human discovery of Project Zenith. That the truest edge of space was not found in the cosmos, but in the echoing chambers of the self. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss, in its cold, silent perfection, had stared back, leaving them forever changed, forever marked, forever at the edge.